Hello again, and welcome to my second tutorial on Cycle by Amaranth Audio. And in this tutorial I will build on some of the things we covered in the first one and look at how we can start to make more complicated sounds using Cycle. And so I'll just get started. So I'm just going to make a new sound. And so in the first tutorial we were focused mainly in this wave shape editor. So now I'm going to start here again, but I'm going to expand into the magnitude spectrum editor as well. So I'm just going to take you through a few key concepts that we didn't cover in the last tutorial. So first of all, I'm just going to kind of draw a basic sine wave, and I can do that by clicking 2 points with the left mouse button just over there and over here, and you can see there is a basic low amplitude sine wave there, and I can just hit a few keys. You can hear that. You can also hear that there's clicking every time I hit a key, and like I covered in the last tutorial, you can just go to the audio menu and select declick, which will address that issue. Now previously we just looked at one waveform, but on Cycle you can layer multiple waveforms on top of each other, and while these are not exactly the same as multiple oscillators, it can achieve similar kind of effects. So to do that, you need to go over to this left hand side here where you've got this window called waveform service, and to the left of that you've got a bunch of buttons over here, which I will just zoom into, and these allow you to start adding layers. So to add another waveform layer, you can just click on this plus button here, and that will then create another layer. And I can perhaps on this one draw a different type of waveform. So let's draw something like a saw wave, and click that there, click that there. And as we covered in the last tutorial, to increase the sharpness of these curves, you just click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. So now you've got two waveforms sat on top of each other. You've got this wave, this saw wave, and you've got the sine wave underneath it. And this thick line here shows you the combined waveform. So with the saw wave added on top of the sine wave, this is what you get. And we can hear how that sounds, and we can tweak these points as we edit it. And you can see in this spectrum editor up here, you can see all the harmonics that have been added by the sine wave, and then all the complex harmonics that have been added by this introduction of a second wave. And on the left hand side here you can flick between the two different waves. So you can just left click, drag up and down to cycle through the waves. So you've got this is the first sine wave, and you can see the 2 points over here, and then you can get onto the second one, and you can see the 3 points that I used here to make this saw wave. So that's basically all you need to know about creating layers, and we're going to take this a little step further. So we're going to leave this waveform as it is, just sounding nice and static there. And now what we're going to do is go up here and start adding additional harmonics. So there's two ways you can do this. One, as we discovered in the previous tutorial, was to turn this into use this like a filter. So anything above this line adds waveforms, or anything below it deducts adds harmonics, and anything below the line deducts harmonics. Or you can move it into additive mode, where it operates practically like an additive synthesizer, and you can start adding different harmonics. So we're going to do that, and as you can see we've got a bunch of harmonics already here. So we're going to perhaps add kind of little peaks over here just to see what happens to the sound, really. So you can see already it's defaulted to the magnitude layer, and you can see up here this button which puts you onto the spectrum view, and then there's another button here, another two buttons here, and you can see this one sets it into filter mode, and this one here sets it into additive mode. So we're going to click that, and that now takes this magnitude spectrum, and what we draw here is going to be added onto the waveform that we've already drawn here. So I'm just going to draw a little shape over here maybe, and we can start just shaping that. And as you can see, as I move this stuff around, this waveform here now is changing shape to reflect what happens to the actual single cycle waveform as I change these harmonics. And as before, with the other curve settings, you can change these curve sharpness. And so I've just created this little bump here, and we're gonna see how that sounds. And as I hit the keys, I'm gonna move this around, and you'll be able to hear the difference in the tone as I do that. In fact, I'm going to select all of these points that I've created and move them around as I play some keys. So you can see that. And I can also, if I want to get a more detailed view, I can scroll up and down and zoom in and see more of which individual harmonics are being affected here. So now that we have that, let's add some movement to it. So we'll cover what we did last time with using the scratch envelopes. I'm just going to zoom out of this, and we're going to kind of move these points around and make them wobble a bit, just to give it a bit of tonal variation. So as we did in the previous tutorial, I can assign these points to a timeline and start moving them around. So I'm going to do that. So as before, I'm going to unlink the timeline view there, and I'm going to set this to the beginning of the time frame, and then I'm going to make sure nothing is selected and select these 3 points. And then let's set where they're going to be at the start. Let's say we're going to start over here, and now that that's selected, I can press escape to deselect everything. Now I'm going to move the timeline up to the end of the time frame, and then go back and select these points again. And in fact, what I might do, instead of selecting all these points, I might select each individual point and give it its own path. So we'll start with this one. So I'm just going to move this all the way down here. I might move this point over here, and I might move this point over here. Okay, now we should be able to hear how that changes over time. And you can hear that as it's changing as the time goes on, but you can also see what's happening to that curve as we go through, like that. Now another thing we didn't cover is that while we can set the point positions across the timeline, we can also set the shape of this curve. So we can come down here and we can adjust this curve and make it quite shallow, like that. Sorry, like that. And then we can move it up to here, and when it gets there, we want it to be quite sharp, so we're going to just sharpen it up like that. I might move it a little bit up just to emphasize it. So now, as you can see, as the timeline, as you move it down, you'll see the curve starts to change shape as we go across the timeline. Okay, so just to illustrate that point, really, when you create more points, you're not only setting the position, but you're also setting the curve shape as well. And this applies down here as well in the wave shape editor as well. So let's listen to how that sounds. So you can hear the effect of that harmonic being added on. So what I'm going to do is rather than it just sweep across, I'm going to make that loop around, and we do that using the scratch envelope like we did in the previous one. So again, we go down here where the envelopes are and we click on this scratch envelope button. Now, as with the layers, you can have multiple scratch envelopes. So what I'm going to do, because everything defaults to the first scratch envelope even though it's not turned on, I'm going to create a second scratch envelope. And I'm going to assign this envelope to this movement here. And I can do that quite simply by going up here And where it says here, you'll see this little label here which says s.ch, which is kind of trying to tell you that's something to do with the scratch envelope, and I can click on this button and then select number 2. Now this waveform is being modulated by this second scratch envelope which I've got selected here, and what I'm going to do is loop it as well. So I'll select this left mouse point and press the loop button, and as you can see it's just flattened it because the end loop point and the start loop point are always mirrored. So if I move that, the end one moves as well. So to give it some dynamics in the tone, I need to create another loop point like this. So now when I hit the keys, you should hear that looping. So pretty much as we did in the first tutorial, the scratch envelope is now affecting the shape of this harmonic graph, but it's not affecting anything else because this is a second scratch envelope that doesn't affect anything else. So what I'm going to do is let's add another harmonic layer. So that's in exactly the same way as we did earlier, where we just added a saw wave to the sine wave. I can just go up here and then press the plus button, and that now gives me, as you can see, the old envelope has disappeared, and now I can start drawing another envelope. And on this one I'm going to do something slightly different. So previously I've created lots of points and then given them shapes. On this one I'm just going to create 2 points, and I'm going to get complexity using something called a deformer. So let me just demonstrate how that works. So just to recap, we're on a second harmonic layer. The first harmonic layer is here, which is nicely morphing along the timeline, and it's looping, and what we're going to do is add another layer on top of that to give it some interest. So we just go here and only select the second layer. So this is now the second layer. And before I create any points here, I'm going to create a shape down here in this little section called the deformers. And I'm just going to, let's just click a few points and just create a couple of peaks. Okay. As you can see, the same principles apply to everywhere else. The way you move the graphs around, left click to create, right click to move, hover over the thing, and you can sharpen it up. Okay, let's sharpen these down as well. Okay, so now we have this little shape, and what we can do is we can apply this shape to any point in either of these windows. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a couple of points here. So let's create a point there, and we'll create a point there. And so you can see nothing's gonna happen now. Let me just undo that. As you can see, I've still got link selected, so it's gonna, every time I move things, it's gonna put it on the timeline. So I need to just relink that. So what I'm going to do is just flatten this. So although this is a second harmonic layer, it's not really affecting the sound in any way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this shape to this point here. So I right click on that to select it. So now that's selected, and as you can see, each point is called a vertex in Cycle, and it's got a bunch of parameters up here. We're not going to go into all these other ones, but we're just going to look at this one at the bottom called component curve. And this lets you select one of these deformer layers, and like you can with the layers and the harmonic layers, you can have a number of different deformers. So what I'm going to do is, while this point is selected here, I'm going to go to the component curve and select number 1. Now you can see these 2 points correspond to this. So what it's done is it's fit this shape between this point and the right hand point. Okay, now I can move this around, and you can see it's going to squeeze those 2 shapes in there, or I can expand it out, and it will always keep those 2 shapes. So this makes it quite interesting to create complex shapes and move them around on the frequency spectrum. So, and the other thing is you can adjust the amount that it's applied by using this deform gain slider here. So whilst I've got this thing selected there, I can move that up and down. And as you could with the curve shapes, you can adjust how much of this is being applied across the timeline. So let's create a slight movement here, and let's see how that sounds as we. So we're going to start off here. Now, because we left the first scratch envelope as it was, it will use that by default. And so what we're going to do is, like we did before, we're going to move this all the way down here as the sound is playing, and let's see how that sounds. So okay, so let me just do that. So again, like before, I'm going to set the timeline to the beginning. I'm going to delink time, and I'm going to select this just to kind of set where I'm going to start. So I'm going to start here. Then I'm going to move the timeline to the end, and then I'm going to select this point and move it all the way down here. So as I now move the timeline, you should see, and you can see I've only got 1 point here, and this is again taking the shape from here. Okay. And what I'm also going to do is set, while it's at the beginning, I'm going to have this quite low, so there's not really having much of an effect. Ooh, that's not working because I've got the wrong point selected. So I need to select this point again, and I'm going to set this slider right down. So while it's at the beginning of the timeline, there's not much effect going on. And then as the timeline goes on, I'm going to crank this right up. So I select that again and then move this here. So let's listen to how that sounds. So I think this second peak is probably affecting too much. So what I can do is I can just adjust this down here and bring it right down. I can even invert it, but let's just do that. So the second one. And as you can see, as I affect this here, it's going to affect it up there. So now if I wanted to make this shape more complicated, it's dead simple. I can just add more points, and as I add them, they're going to be showing up there. So let's add some more points there to give it a bit of variety. So you can see there, I've kind of created a second shape that now moves across the timeline, and I'm going to give this second one its own scratch envelope as well. So again, I just go down here where the scratch envelopes are. You can see it's already selected, and I add another scratch envelope, and to this layer here I then set the scratch envelope to layer 3. So now I can loop this like I did before, and I might give this a different shape. Like that. And I can adjust the curves on it just to give it a smoother. So let's see how that sounds. So you can hear how that's now affected on the timeline. What I might do, because there's quite a lot of high frequency stuff going on there, is just move this endpoint, relink this, and move this endpoint down. So it's kind of operating more in the mids than it is anywhere else. So let's have a listen to how that sounds. So that's pretty much it. So you can see, just to recap, we've shown you how to add multiple layers on the wave spectrum and add multiple scratch envelopes as well, and also looked at adding deformers to the points there. So just to finish this off, I think we will maybe just add a bit of reverb, and perhaps we'll put a volume envelope onto it just to give it make it more of a string sound or pad sound or whatever. Let's have a listen to that sound. Can't really hear that reverb. Let's up it. Anyway, I hope that makes more sense, and kind of shows you some of the more advanced features. I mean, within the scheme of what Cycle can do, everything I've shown you so far is like the most basic stuff. There's a lot more to discover, and have a play around with it. I do recommend following some of the built-in tutorials on this, and you can do that by going to the help menu, going to tutorial. I would suggest you start with the intro tutorial and the sound design tutorial. I think they're the most easy to follow and will get you started. And yeah, so I hope that's helpful, and leave any comments if you're not sure about anything or want to know how to do things that I haven't covered, and I'll try and look at those in my next tutorial. So I'll be signing out now, and yeah, good luck, and I hope you enjoy playing around with Cycle as much as